Thank you, Sarah. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time from your very busy schedule to join us. We're very excited to have you here. You all are coming from very important organizations or important partners to us. So yes, we're super excited to share this work with you. So as you can see on the screen, today, we're going to be discussing and provide a very short overview of the report that was recently published by AHMA, titled The Stories of Extreme Heat Among Urban Indigenous Households in British Columbia. And this was a result of engagement with our members across British Columbia regarding the experiences around the heat dome that happened and also similar climate emergencies. So again, thank you for joining us. Before I start, I just would like to respectfully acknowledge that I work, live, and play on the unceded and traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Coquitlam nations. At AHMA, we honor elders past, present, and future from all nations and traditional territories. And these lands and waters that are colonially named British Columbia are home to many, many distinct First Nations. And an interesting statistical fact is that more than 70% of the Indigenous population in BC now lives in urban areas. So for those of you who know me, and I had the privilege to talk to you before, it's great to see you again. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Shahid, and I joined AHMA as the Energy Projects Coordinator a couple of months back, and I'm a member of the Engagement and Technical Services team. So Sarah is my direct manager, so I'm very lucky to work with her and the other members of our team. I come with a background in Indigenous nonprofit sector and also engineering and the energy sector. So this is very much so my passion. I'm super excited to be doing this work. And I just want to recognize that this study, while it was led by me, my perspective and language are very much so limited. So my position was a witness and an observer of the lived experiences. So I feel very grateful to be able to, I guess, share the experiences and stories of our participants. So AHMA, as many of you may already know, stands for the Aboriginal Housing Management Association. We are a members-based nonprofit, and our members are Indigenous housing and service providers across British Columbia. And we provide a very diverse array of services and support to our members across BC, but eventually our goal is to lead and advance the housing rights for all Indigenous people living in BC. So today, this is just a very flexible agenda. We just want to have a very casual space here today for all of us to contribute and have a conversation. But just to give us some guidance, I guess, where the conversation goes, briefly, we're going to go through the research journey and how we actually embarked on this journey to actually do this research, dig a little deeper into the stories we heard from our participants. And we are very, very grateful and excited to have Thomas O'Brien, one of our members from the Island Urban Indigenous Wellness Society, joining us today. So he has generously offered to share some of his experiences and expertise firsthand. So we are so grateful to have you here, Thomas. I won't put you on the spot right now, maybe later. And after that, we're hoping to have some breakout rooms for all of you folks to have discussions, maybe reflect on what you heard. And also, please bring your own expertise and experiences. Again, all of us have a lot to offer sitting in this room. And after that, hopefully we can wrap up the conversation and have some maybe space for questions and discussion. So again, as many sitting in this room may already know, climate change is causing a more intense and longer heat waves and other climate emergencies in British Columbia and globally. Many may remember that in the summer of 2021, British Columbia experienced a very significant extreme heat event, and temperatures were very high, and there was devastating impacts on many, many communities. And unfortunately, we know that the risk to Indigenous populations is extremely high due to the legacies of colonialism that has led to poor quality housing, chronic health conditions, lack of resources, and of course, the list goes on, many, many other systemic barriers. So for AHMA to better understand what these barriers are and maybe fill some of these knowledge gaps that we had responding in the impacts of climate change, such as extreme heat, we decided to basically commission this research so that we can meaningfully engage with our housing providers across BC to understand what their barriers are, what their needs are, and how actually we can support them better when climate emergencies actually occur. So just very, again, briefly showing you one of the direct quotes from the experiences that we heard during the interviews. It's a very, very impactful quote that as you can see. And I guess it speaks for itself, but as we can see, the heat dome had devastating impacts on many communities across BC. So just very briefly going through the methods that we used. So the findings of the report are essentially informed by the comments and the inputs and the feedback that staff members or experienced team members from the 16 Indigenous housing providers across British Columbia shared with us. We did reach out to all of our members, but as we know, because of constrained capacity and lack of time to actually contribute to a lot of the different directions that are getting pulled, we were able to engage with 16 of them. And we conducted interviews with them that happened during the months of August and September last year. And the report was written in October. So in addition to that, we also tried to bridge the realm of a theory with the lived experiences. So we also reviewed literature, both gray and academic, so that we understand what the existing theory in the realm of academia actually is. And again, this work would not have been possible without the generous participation of our nonprofit housing providers. I just want to really thank them again to take the time to participate. So we heard a lot of key messages, and there were many, many common threads that we heard during these conversations. One being that Indigenous people and Indigenous housing providers face a complex, interconnected set of barriers, and this really increases their vulnerability to extreme heat. They rightfully told us that they want to see more wraparound support systems so that they can actually better respond to these intersecting challenges. So honestly, the key message for me personally that really stayed with me was the fact that housing providers, all of them, they told me that they have deep and long-lasting relationships with their tenants. So they knew exactly who is most vulnerable, who needs help, who needs to go where. And yeah, they knew them intimately. And that really helped them to make sure that vulnerable tenants are staying safe during extreme heat events. But at the same time, they are stretched thin a lot of times. So they told us that they want to see funding, sustainable funding, and also tools to increase their capacity and hire dedicated new team members so that they can actually plan and strategize for climate emergencies. And as, again, many sitting in this room may already know, systemic underfunding of Indigenous housing has unfortunately led to poorly built and low quality and a lot of times inefficient homes that again are not built for the local climate and for the local environment. So this means that usually they're not thermally comfortable really, and they are not climate resilient. So many Indigenous houses are aging rapidly, and that means that households are dealing with poor insulation, mold, and high heating and cooling costs. And as we are facing more climate emergencies, these are becoming urgent issues that we really need to think about and actually address. So of course, with that, we know that building more energy efficient homes that have better insulation and are climate resilient are a very important step to protect the most vulnerable households. And that's what our housing providers are committed to. And again, a very strong message that really stayed with me and was a common thread throughout all the conversations I had was that they advocated for building intentional alliances across different agencies and organizations and governmental institutions. So they essentially told me that they want to see all these different, for the lack of a better word, stakeholders or organizations involved in planning for climate emergency to better collaborate with each other so that they can get what they need when it comes to extreme heat and other climate emergencies. So now I'm going to dig a little bit deeper into the actual direct stories that we heard from our members. Before I move on, are there any questions? Does anybody want to say anything, any burning feedback before I move on? Please feel free to raise your hand, or I'm not monitoring the chat, but if Sarah is saying something, please do share with me. No, moving on. Okay, great. So we heard that, extreme heat doesn't really happen in isolation, right? It doesn't happen in silos. When an extreme heat event happens, there also comes wildfires and smoke. So our housing providers have to deal with the compounding effects of all these things at the same time. So this can obviously be very detrimental for their tenants' mental and physical health. So in addition to having access to cooling equipment, which provided much relief, they also asked for getting tools like HEPA filters and cooling kits and emergency kits so that they can make the indoor environment safe and healthy for their tenants. And something that sometimes get overlooked is the fact that the harsh conditions during an extreme heat event or a climate emergency can really jeopardize food security, cultural practices, and access to sacred spaces and access to traditional medicine. So it's not just one isolated emergency, right? It's a very multi-layered and complex crisis, can have cascading effects on the community. And again, a direct, powerful quote from one of our participants. We can see that unfortunately, due to limited access to resources, especially when an emergency like that hits, our housing providers and decision makers need to make very difficult decisions on who actually gets to receive emergency kits and cooling equipment. And of course, they want to help everybody, but because they can't, those difficult decisions actually fall on the housing providers and managers. So not surprisingly at all, they all told us that they felt very overwhelmed during the extreme heat event because they're already dealing with limited capacity. So responding to an emergency like that is, requires a lot of resources and capacity to respond to was a big strain on their staff and resources. The truth is that most tenants living in urban Indigenous housing, they have specialized needs and complex priorities. So these traditional social housing programs that may be out there cannot really adequately accommodate them. So our housing managers and housing providers are always seeking staff members who have the right training, the right values, and the right experience, right? So that they're able to attend to these complex needs. So recruiting and retaining staff is already a big challenge for them. So when an emergency happens, they're so stretched thin, and it's really tough for them to actually decide where to allocate those resources. But, again, with limitations comes innovation and creativity. So to address a lot of these limitations, they did become very creative, as you can see in this example, and they were able to use existing meal delivery routes, which shows that they are very quick on their feet, able to find alternative ways to serve their community. So there were many stories like this. This is only one, and very impressive ways that our housing providers were able to find ways to serve their community at the end of the day. So again, because they knew their tenants so well, they knew exactly how to communicate with them. Like a lot of times they used in-person check-ins, they used word of mouth, emails, social media, depending on who I talked to, because they knew what the demographic of their tenants were. They used many different methods. But at the same time, they also reported that some tenants, especially elders who may feel kind of dependent on others to help them, they sometimes felt trapped in their units when the heat dome came. And due to a stigma, they were reluctant to ask for help. So this really highlights the need for adopting a trauma-informed approach when it comes to planning and also responding to climate emergencies. And again, this may be a very well-known fact for many sitting in this room that, social stigma, historical trauma all of those may stop vulnerable populations from asking for help from service providers or even sharing personal information. So again, understanding what a trauma-informed approach is and adopting that becomes very, very important for a climate emergency. And again, direct communication is key when something like this happens, when a heat dome comes. So they asked us that they want to see targeted information packages built for their own community, specifically for their tenants, so that they can easily share that and tell them what the health risks are, right, to the vulnerable tenants. And again, they would rather this burden not be put on them. So again, asking the partners to help them develop and distribute these targeted information. And the truth is that if they want to get funding, unfortunately, a lot of times funding applications are very cumbersome and inaccessible for housing providers to be able to actually use funding to do this work. So they told us that they want to see fundamental transformation of these funding streams so that they can access the much needed financial incentive, right? Instead of trying to continuously find ways to stack or navigate this complex world of funding streams. So as I mentioned, this gold, a common thread of meaningful partnerships and proper collaboration, clearly creating alliances was a big piece in the conversations that I had. So almost everybody told us that they want to see more of that, and they want us supporting them actually better work together. And of course, the biggest conversation for me personally, since I'm biased, is the infrastructure piece. We know that there is a big push to transitioning to low greenhouse gas emissions and low emission infrastructure and energy systems. And this is, of course, very, very important as a step to tackle climate change. And our housing providers, of course, we're all committed to doing this work. But then the truth is that they also at the same time need to balance that with ensuring that their tenants have access to reliable, affordable, and accessible heating and cooling systems. And on this journey, of course, unfortunately, they face many, many challenges. The big ones being funding and capacity. So this debate, of course, circulates, around this push for electrification and ensuring that we make sure that this transition is equitable for urban Indigenous populations and, of course, other vulnerable communities. So our housing providers told us that they want to see more funding and capacity, but also having the agency to what is right for their own communities. And the infrastructure in urban Indigenous housing is aging. So they face a lot of barriers, including, for example, electrical capacity of older buildings. And while it's a significant barrier, they also face problems accessing funding because a lot of times funders are reluctant to actually fund older buildings projects, right? So they are either left to their own devices, finding a way to fund that project, or sometimes they have to abandon projects like that. This is a big quote. I know there's a lot of information there, but this again, directly from one of our conversations, really highlights the fact that energy efficiency and climate resiliency can play a very important role in maintaining a community's well-being, especially during an extreme heat event. Why? Because a community's well-being is so closely intertwined with high-quality housing and living in homes that have adequate ventilation and reliable air conditioning and are climate resilient, right? And many, many other factors that are linked to the place that all of us tend to call home. So, I mean, as many of you may remember, units and homes and apartments were getting unbearably hot during the extreme. So getting those free air conditioners that, again, some of you may remember, were distributed were such a big relief for our housing providers. But at the same time, they told us that, some were focused on cooled common areas and getting access to air conditioning for common cooled areas. But they told us that a lot of their tenants actually prefer to stay in their own units. So their priority had to be shifted to how do we actually make sure that the tenant's own space is cooled and safe during extreme heat. So that kind of completely changed the narrative for some of our housing providers. So while common cooled areas and cooling centers are provided as a good solution a lot of times for an extreme heat event or climate emergency, our housing providers sometimes had a very, very different experience. And this may have very, very different reasons, depending on what the demographic is. Like, for example, they told us that elders tend to like higher temperatures, right? And they may not even use air conditioning that much. So it becomes very individualized and trying to make sure that each tenant is actually comfortable in their own unit the way that they want. But again, crucial to remember that regardless of what solutions they were providing, it was important to make sure that tenants at least had the option to cool down, because when an extreme heat event happens, the health impacts can get dangerous very fast and they can come out of nowhere. So it was very important for them to make sure at least they have an option in their own building to stay cooled. And unfortunately, these conversations are always around multi-residential buildings and apartments. Single-family dwellings tend to kind of get left out in a lot of these conversations and in incentive programs. One of our housing providers told us that, you know, providing one air conditioner to this whole single-family home isn't really not sufficient to cool down the whole house, right? So a lot of times they have this one cooled room and they all kind of scrambling to figure out, okay, how do we actually arrange all the people in the home so that everybody stays cool. And unfortunately, a lot of times, single family dwellings are not even eligible to participate in a lot of the incentives programs. So we're really hoping that relying on this experience that we had during this heat dome, more of the financial incentives that are coming out are going to take single family dwellings into account and hopefully be more holistic. And of course, again, as we have more air conditioners and we have more electrification, increased pressure on the grid is going to be a big problem. And power outages are already a challenge and a concern for a lot of our housing providers. So we also need to think about, as partners, how do we actually address this and how do we make sure that the most vulnerable do not have their power cut off when a climate emergency happens.
Can I ask a question before you move on?
For sure.
Sorry, I don't know if you can see hands up, but I've not
I'm sorry, no, I can't.
No, it's okay. It's Megan from City of Vancouver. And so this is topical for us as we work through our climate change adaptation strategy. And I'm sorry if I'm not supposed to be here, but I caught you guys on LinkedIn last night and I added myself to this group because I knew there'd be some great information. And energy poverty is a term I haven't heard used a lot. And I just want to make sure I understand it from your point of view. If we're to steal that terminology and use that term energy poverty, should we be considering that in all aspects that you just described, like the capacity of the grid itself, the actual physical units in residences, and on top of that, the costs of providing that, like just like a full 360 point of view? Is that how you would want it to be interpreted?
Sure, I'll definitely share my perspective and I'll let Sarah
Please.
also share hers. So yes, the conversation of energy poverty is, I could talk to you about energy poverty for a whole day. But if you ask me, I think this is a very important conversation to have and a concept and a phenomenon to consider, because I think increasingly, as we are again transitioning to different energy systems and electrifying, which rightfully we should, this is going to be a big problem. It already is a problem for our housing providers because they told us people are turning air conditioners and their electrical bills are going up and they don't have any support to address the increased operational costs. So I think, again, as partners, utilities, city, municipalities, we all need to think about, okay, what do we do? Do we maybe provide more incentives to actually help people address the increased operational costs, or do we do something else on the, I mean, I'm not a policymaker, but I think this is a very important conversation to have. This is a concern that already is becoming a big issue for our tenants. So I would say
I appreciate that.
I mean,
thank you. Yeah, my background's really water based and drought and concerns about that with the heat dome. So this is so apologies if others are rolling their eyes and thinking like, how do you not know about energy poverty?
Oh, no.
But it's really it really caught my eye, because even simplistically in the city of Vancouver, we've looked to electrify vehicles, for example, only to then realize that our own city, our grids can't handle that extra load. And we're talking something that's running an entire large city. So I can see that, yeah, this is going to be a huge problem. And sorry, I'll
Yes,
be
no.
quiet now.
I'll just say that I
It's
think a big
fascinating.
question in the realm of energy poverty and high energy burden is who is going to be taking on the burden, right, of actually transitioning all those things that you said, the fact that the grid cannot take the load, so it needs more upgrades, the fact that, electricity is going to be the main energy provider, and like we're switching away from gas and it's going to be more expensive. So yes, it's really important to think about the fact that we shouldn't put that burden on the vulnerable community members, right? So
No, absolutely
there,
not. No.
there are a lot of tools. Again, I mean, this is again a big conversation, and I would love to continue with you someday. But it is very important to think about, yeah, how do we move forward that doesn't happen, because it's better to prevent it instead of trying to solve it after it happens. And I'll again let Sarah add her perspective, because I'm sure she has a lot of thoughts on this too.
I'll just note that most of the insights that we get around energy poverty, which is being defined in Canada as where more than 6% of income goes towards an energy bill, is coming from an organization called Efficiency Canada, which is a nonprofit research organization that's doing incredible work around the transition towards energy efficiency, electrification, and decarbonization, and the impact that it's having on vulnerable Canadians.
Yes, great people to talk to. Gosh, yeah, there are so many people. Yasmin Abrams, I'm not sure if you know them, from Cambo. She's been working in this field for a very long time, so she has a lot more to say than I do about this. So yes, lots of amazing people doing work. And again, there are very interesting tools out there from other countries, especially, funny enough, not to root for the US, but they are doing amazing work in some of the states addressing energy poverty. And I'd be happy to share some of the research out of those states. So there are definitely ways to tackle this and address this. I hope we answered your question. Yes, moving on.
Yeah, you did. Sorry, I'm trying to unmute. Yeah, that's fantastic. I'm frantically trying to take
Awesome.
notes here, so that's fantastic. Thank you.
That's great. Yes, I'll be happy to share all those resources with you. And again, big conversation, big conversation. And you can see it here. I mean, they directly told us that this is already a concern for them. Like, folks were already challenged when it comes to paying for their bills, whether it was gas bills or electrical bills. And while it was great that they had air conditioners and folks were very grateful for that, it became a bigger concern now because they had increased operational costs. And unfortunately, in certain regions, depending on where you look at, in British Columbia, this was a conversation happening in central interior of BC. They told us there are no incentive programs supporting households grappling with a high energy burden. So you're essentially leaving that tenant dealing with the high costs on their own. Oops, what did I do? Okay, yes. So talking about creativity and innovation, again, so many of our participants had, they took an initiative and they started thinking of ways to tackle the heat dome themselves. So they prepared cooling kits and emergency kits that included so many different things, like drinking water bottles, cooling packs, electrolytes for their tenants as soon as the news of the heat dome actually reached their region. And again, interestingly enough, this goes back to, again, cooling centers. Transportation was a big challenge for folks who didn't have a personal vehicle, or maybe different elderly folks. So they told us that maybe we need to have mobile cooling centers, like an RV or a bus that could be used as that is cooled, and it could be used as a mobile cooling center for their vulnerable groups. So, you know, again, that meant that a lot of them, and when I asked them about central cooling centers, they told us that, you know what, that's not really our first or even best option a lot of times, because folks can't get to it, or it's too far, or again, it's not really that person's own home. So folks rather stay in their own home and try to stay cooled. Yeah, we can again very directly see it in this quote. They had issues transporting people there, whether it was public transportation or private transportation. So they just had to shift their priority to trying to find ways to help tenants stay cooled in their own units. And with that, I am very excited to finally get to the introduction of Thomas O'Brien. We are so grateful to have you here today. So I won't do an extensive introduction. I will let Thomas introduce himself, but very briefly, he is the Housing and Facilities Manager at the Island Urban Indigenous Wellness Society in Nanaimo. And he was generous enough to participate in this research. And Thomas, if you're out there, I will pass it on to you to introduce yourself. Thank you again for being here.
I'd squeal, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you, Shahad. I first want to start by acknowledging the traditional territory of the Nanaimo First Nation in which we live, learn, work, and play, and our housing property, Natsmat Laylam, resides on in Nanaimo. Yeah, I'm happy to be here today. Always get nervous before I share or speak, but we faced Island Urban Indigenous Wellness Society. I'm the manager of housing and facilities. I've been with the organization coming up on 6 years. We own and operate a 25-unit multi-unit residential building it was actually Passive House certified for energy efficiency. Within the 25 units, we have four studio bachelor units for youth transitioning from government care to independent living, 6 one-bedroom units. 3 of those one-bedroom units are designated for elders, 3 two-bedroom units, and 12 three-bedroom units for families. So yeah, we've definitely, with the Passive House design of the building, my original understanding that there was a 1 to 3% overheating factor in relation to the design, and in 2021 the heat dome definitely exposed that significantly. We faced many challenges for our families through that, and we're grateful to be able to have an amenity room space here called the Chufwa Room, which we had opened up as a cooling center and a refuge during heat events. But we have, you know, many elders and vulnerable tenants with immunocompromised and stuff like that in our community here. So we'd be spending weekends and late nights and being on site, opening up the amenity room space to provide a cooling center, and make sure our fridge here in the kitchen had access to cold water all the time, and they're just doing door knocking and checking in on our elders and our vulnerable tenant population. And running the sprinkler out in the backyard and turning the sprinkler on for the kids, and having water fights and balloons and stuff, and just any way to try to keep cool and check in and make sure that our families are doing okay through it. Coming out of our experience, we would see families not being able to utilize their whole home. It would get so hot in, say, some of our bigger units, our 2 and 3 bedroom units, that families would be taking their mattresses and stuff and down into the living room and not even utilizing the upstairs space in their home. So we come to realize that this is an issue, and I could see when I'd go in and do maintenance in the homes and doing the HRV filter change, that it would be like hot upstairs, and tenants would be sharing. So through that, we actually, with the support of AHMA, just last year completed an overheating investigation, where we had an engineering firm come in and take some measurements and readings, and check the equipment flow rate through the HRVs, and did a study, and we've come to find that, yeah, there is definitely an issue. So we are now working on, last year we also took advantage of the BC Hydro incentive to get some air conditioning units, but I kind of took a left turn because, again, as housing providers, we always face the challenge of, like you said, how do you decide on who gets what? Obviously, we want to target our vulnerable population and our elders first, but I always want to try to get something for everybody. So as opposed to getting a couple air conditioners for our elders, I requested to get fans, like a really good high quality fan. So we were able to get funding to get one fan for each unit, and then 2 to go in our amenity room, which felt great because it's hard to carry that burden when you have to decide, out of 25 families, you only get something for 3 or 4. And then it's never a good feeling as a manager. So I was happy to be able to get the fans, one for each family. So yeah, so now we've moving forward after having conducted the overheating investigation, and we've got the report back now, which basically confirms our concern that there is an issue. And now we're working to move forward to find funding, always funding dependent, on seeing how we can go about getting air conditioning, like wall-mounted split-list duct air conditioning units into every unit here. Of course, fighting for funding is always a challenge. But again, I got generous support from AHMA, which I'm grateful and appreciative for, as we've seek avenues to secure that funding to basically do a big retrofit for our property here. But in the meantime, we continue to just, support our families as best we can, keep the amenity room open as a refuge. I mean, 2022, we also had the heat wave. So just spending that extra time. Again, we have capacity issues, so it would just be myself here on the weekend, turning the sprinklers on, checking on the elders, after hours sometimes, opening up the amenity room as a cooling center, and just always want to put our families first and make sure that they're well taken care of, and do everything we can to ensure that they're able to, of course, reside in their own unit, which is, sorry, my automatic lights here, is always their preference. And we face a challenge too with the cooling centers here locally are not right around the corner. I mean, quite a ways away in some instances, and then not all of our families have the ability to travel or have transportation to get there. And their preference is always to just kind of be here and be comfortable in their own home. I mean, who really wants to travel out in that heat as well to get to a cooling center and then have to worry about getting back, right? Yeah, so just always try to go above and beyond, make sure our families are comfortable, and just pushing forward to see what our next steps are in applying to see if we can get some funding to get the retrofit done in the property. I think that's it for me. Any questions?
Yes, please, folks, if you have questions, this would be the great time to ask Thomas. He has so much experience and expertise. So,
Oh yeah, I've learned so much over the last few years. Yeah, so it's definitely been a learning journey for myself, and I've been grateful to have the support and learn from others that are experts in the field as well. And just, yeah, families first, community first, and yeah, we'll continue to move forward in a good way to figure it out.
I mean, it's
Maybe
always
just
so inspiring listening to you. Sorry, go ahead.
No, sorry, I was just going to say, just thank you, Thomas, for sharing, because I think what is often underlooked when we try to work through future solutions is we get stuck, whether it's through just the constraints that we're under or the funding options that are available, a one size fits all mentality. And that's really not the case. We very much all understand circumstances differently. We come from different lived experiences, and we feel that our options for aid and support and actual true compassion are very varied. And I don't think it's equitable in how it's distributed at this point anyway. So I'm just so happy I stumbled upon this Zoom, and I thank you both for sharing your knowledge and being generous with it, because I think the more that we understand different aspects of where the challenges are, the more we can help to fill those gaps and move forward in a more functional and inclusive way. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, thank you so much, Thomas. Again, yes, I feel like your experience is such an interesting example of, one interesting low greenhouse gas emission building solution coming with, I guess, when an e-dome hits. So, if nobody else has any questions, I think we're going to wrap up.
Oh, sorry.
Thomas's.
Hi there. Sorry.
Oh, yes, Ariana. Yes,
Can you
please
hear me,
go
Shahid?
ahead.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank
Yes.
you. Thank you for the content. It's just very interesting and always good to hear the lived experience, the level of detail around the barriers that you see from your purview, just dealing with the various housing providers that are serving Indigenous communities. I appreciate it. I'm wondering if you've got any thoughts around because as you talk about, issues of climate emergency and greater resilience in the building structures, greater energy efficiency, addressing energy poverty, there's such an intersection of so many factors. And I'm just curious if you've given some thought or heard any kind of conversations around how can we actually bring all these things together? Because you've done a good job at highlighting the need. But for example, I work at Fortis BC in the social housing program, so it's nice to see some familiar faces here. But the space we can influence is very specific, whereas the needs are very broad across cuts across many issues. So we need an intersectional partnership approach. So I'm just curious, throwing it out to kind of anyone on the call, what are ideas around how do we bring all of the players together without well, this is just the piece I can work in and this is the piece I can work in, and everyone stays within their limits and boundaries, and therefore we don't advance in these intersectional issues. It's a broader question, I guess. I just thought I'd ask, given the audience.
It's a really good question that I think definitely us in AHMA are grappling with literally every day. So
Yeah.
I will let folks who actually have some thoughts maybe in the room to share, and then if not, then maybe us in AHMA members can share what we're thinking.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. Yes, please, folks, feel free to unmute and share your thoughts about this very important question.
I'll just jump in. I think, Ariana, it's definitely a question that's come up in some other forums as well, and the need for that collaborative approach is huge. I think the challenge is around like who has capacity to provide leadership over that group. I would, love to see the provincial government play a key role in convening this kind of multi-organizational approach to coordinating a response. I think the challenge is really around that kind of divulgence of power and jurisdiction that the provincial government is really directing municipalities to provide leadership, but municipalities don't have the capacity to take on that province-wide approach to coordinating organizations that operate at a provincial level.
Thank you. Yeah, and I could see the challenge with that. I mean, given municipalities like have different approaches as well, so you have a patchwork of solutions rather than like a holistic, integrated provincial level. Yeah.
I think a couple of things that come to mind around this too is the whole concept of air conditioning being a luxury item. I think is that whole mindset is slowly, I think, changing or beginning to change now, realizing, that it's not just, for people who are wealthy or they only own their home. Renters do need air conditioning at some point as well. So that problem is problematic. I think another one that comes in that same thing is this regionality conversation. I think we all got taken aback the fact that we know Kamloops needs air conditioning. There's no question of that. But does Prince George, Fort St. John, somewhere on the island? I mean, those areas traditionally never got air conditioning, in history as they did construction. So I think as building standards change and, how we construct social housing in general, those things need to change at the same time as well.
I think that regionality definitely makes it challenging to think about, who is supposed to take, as Sarah said, like the lead on this. I mean, when we were talking to our members, understandably, they were telling us, well, we want to see AHMA taking the lead literally on creating whatever that entity may look like. Is it a task force? Is it an alliance or whatever we want to call it? But to be honest with you, the truth is that, again, we're also stretched for a capacity. So it's not like we have a dedicated staff member who could do that. So question again becomes, yes, who is actually or should be responsible to take that lead? And yeah, that's not an easy, I guess, question to answer. It's complicated, apparently. Does anybody else has any thoughts that they'd like to share? Okay. In that case, well, I mean, actually, with our next step on the presentation, for lack of a better word, is literally going into breakout rooms and having a discussion. So, I mean, we could totally continue having this very important conversation. Yes, so we have how many people now? We're 29 to 30 people. So we're going to put you all maybe a room of 3 people. And then we do have some guiding questions here. But again, if you have some burning points that you want to discuss or some burning questions that you want to discuss, please feel free to do that in your own room. We will not have facilitators in the room. So please feel free to, again, democratically govern the conversation. We're going to give maybe around 5 minutes, maybe a little less, for each group to have a chat and discuss either these questions or other questions. And then we're going to come back to the main room and then put some of you on the spot. No, I'm kidding. Volunteer, have some volunteers to discuss some points from the conversation. So with that, I will pass it on to Sarah to maybe break us out. Oh, there it is. Thank you, Sarah. Okay.
So you do have to hit join to join the breakout room. You should see
Yes,
a button
thanks. Thank you for
at
that.
the bottom of your screen.
Oh, and we can put the questions in the chat.
And Shahad, I left us out of the room. So if you need a minute to run and get
Oh.
some water or something, you can go do that now.
Thank you. I will stretch my legs.
Okay.
Sorry, Sarah, can folks cannot hear us, right?
No, they can't.
Okay, they can't hear us.
Yeah.
So this is an interesting question from Jason. I'm not sure if you're saying that in the chat. Do you think we should address that?
Thomas, are there ways your health workers can better step up and support your work to combat energy poverty? I would just maybe say that like we'd love to follow up on that and we'll share our contact information in the chat kind of thing. Because I think that's great.
Okay.
Let's start a conversation with Jason. Maybe we have a separate meeting with him outside of this. And
That's
so you and I
great.
can put our
Awesome.
emails in the chat and then hopefully he'll follow up.
Perfect. Sounds great. Good. I mean, like to see the initiative. That's awesome.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can see on my screen when like people are talking, it shows like a little like
Right.
microphone button and people are talking a lot. So I think it's going
Oh,
really
that's
well.
awesome.
Yeah, I had to move. Thomas was in a room with someone who left the webinar, so I moved him into another room with
Oh,
Patrick and Cliff, and now they seem to be having a good discussion. So
that's amazing.
I'm glad he didn't get left out. So do you want to give them like one more minute?
Yes, I think so. Because then, yeah, we also need to wrap up and
Yeah, I think you'll need to like power through your next step
yes.
slide pretty fast and then just invite people to get in touch. Like if they want to learn more or chat further, like here's our email addresses, like please reach out. We're happy to talk about this more kind of thing.
Yes, no, I totally agree. I feel like folks are interested to having a conversation, so that's very heartwarming to see.
Yeah.
Should we then invite them to talk about what they talked about, or no? Should we skip that?
Maybe invite like one or two and just make it optional. But like, does anybody want to share a couple of highlights that came up for
Right.
them? I doubt we'll have very many people that volunteer. And then if it's like awkward silence, just be like, no problem. Thank you so much. And move into the
Moving on.
next. Yeah.
Moving on.
Okay. I'm going to
Sounds
give them
good.
their 1 minute warning. I think this is how I do it. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.
They have 1 minute to come back and they might trickle back in.
Yes, that's usually how it happens.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I see it too. That's great. 46.
Here they come.
Great.
And in another 10 seconds, it'll automatically bring everyone back into the main room. It's a good sign when people stay right to the end.
I know, right? I like that.
Welcome back, everyone.
Come back. All
I'll pass it
right,
back to you,
well,
Shahad.
thank you. I hope you all had sound. It looked like you all were having a great discussion, so that's really good to hear. I don't want to put anybody on the spot, but does anybody want to volunteer and maybe share some points from their conversation before we wrap this up? No.
I can
Nobody ever
quickly.
wants to volunteer. Great.
I can do it really quickly. We had a very quick conversation. It wasn't a lot of time, but really, I think the big takeaway is how do we have continuous collaboration and have the messaging be heard and supported. And so we had people from Vancouver Coastal Health, and Fortis, and just how do we build that trust? And I think it's really everything that you presented in your presentation and some of the pieces that Thomas noted as well, that idea that you know, sometimes we even have these things available, but because of past experiences or how people have been treated in the past, or their perceived threat of what is being given to them, or how detrimental the threat of a heat dome, for example, is, they may not see value in you know, grabbing the hand that's being extended. And so how do we find that collaboration amongst stakeholders and then build trust in the community? And I think, you know, I'll just say from City of Vancouver's point of view, this is where I think the work that people are doing towards decolonization reconciliation is so vital. I think there's all these trickle down effects that people don't consider, and this is one of them, is that it's just about being able to build trust to keep people safe. We don't want anything from anyone here except to keep them alive, and that shouldn't be something that we're I struggle. I was saying with the breakout room, I struggle that we're still talking about this, because, you know, human safety should not be on the table in 2024. But
I totally agree with you. Yes, I mean, you think that should be the priority. I totally agree with you. That's amazing. I mean, I feel like that was the important message that we were hoping. I personally was hoping folks would take from this report. One being that, yes, whatever we do, we need to center Indigenous rights and ways of being, and also decolonizing, I mean, meaningfully decolonizing all these systems and processes that we have in place. And of course, we would love to see more collaboration. So I don't want to talk too much because I know the time is up, but we would love to continue this conversation with all of you. So please reach out to us. We will put our emails in the chat. If you had any questions that were left, or yes, these important conversations on how do we actually build meaningful partnerships and how do we better work together, I think these needs to continue. So yes, please reach out, and we would love to continue this conversation with all of you. And again, I know time is up, so I can't talk anymore. Thank you, all of you, for joining us. It was so wonderful to have such an amazing group of people with so much experience and expertise in the same room. And I think, again, this is where that opportunity to actually collaborate together starts, right, in these type of events. So reach out to us, reach out to each other, and yes, let's continue doing this very important work. Thank you again. And yes, I will let my other colleagues, Sarah and Patrick, and if anybody else, I'm sorry, I didn't see you on the chat, to share any final thoughts. Thank you so much.
I just want to thank you, Shahad, for all the work you did leading this research project, engaging with our members, pulling together the final report, and of course, leading this webinar. I think you've done an outstanding job of amplifying the voices of our members and sharing them to a broad audience. And we look forward to seeing what role AHMA can play in supporting our members moving forward to build greater resilience to extreme heat and other hazards that we face in the province. So thank you.
Yes, thank you all. And thank you, Thomas, again, for joining us.